You good, Maverick here? Welcome to podcast episode number 163. I thought I'd make a little episode about a really cool story about a guy that made his home for under $2,000 in 14 days. And this is basically a story that another YouTuber has shared. Yeah, this is basically a story that a YouTuber has shared. Lamar Alexander Solar Cabin channel on YouTube, but recently he has changed the name on his YouTube channel to let me check this. I'm trying to check my screen. Yeah, recently he has changed the name of his YouTube channel to Solar Cabin Off-Grid Adventure Channel. But yeah, that's basically a story of a guy that found himself on. It's basically the story from a guy that found himself in a kind of rough situation. I think he lost his job and had some health issues, and he was recently divorced, things like that. But he had inherited a small piece of land from his father or from his parents, and basically decided to build a small, I think it was 14 by 14 foot cabin, or solar cabin as he calls it. You might also call it a tiny house. He built it for under $2,000 in 14 days. And at the time of this recording, he has lived there for about 15 years. And it's basically it's basically one of the coolest tiny house stories that I know of. Because when it comes to tiny houses, it's basically one of those things that me personally, I'm both extremely negative towards it and extremely positive at the same time. Negative because oftentimes a small little tiny house costs like 30 to $130,000 for a small tiny house, and a lot of them looks horrible as well. And when people build them on wheels, you have another huge disadvantage with tiny houses, which is basically that oftentimes they go down in value. They decrease in value instead of increase in value. So it's kind of like the opposite of real estate. And the thing is, if you are paying like 30 to $130,000 for a tiny house, then oftentimes, in many cases, it doesn't make sense anymore. Because then you're basically paying almost the same as an old house, an old normal size house. You might still argue that yeah, even if you're paying more, it's cheaper to live there. Yeah, but at the same time, it's crazy amounts of money to pay, like $100,000 for a tiny house. But yeah, this guy, he built it for under $2,000 in 14 days. This car passing by. So yeah, the way this guy did it, under $2,000 in 14 days, and it actually makes sense. And and another thing, at the time of this recording, he has lived there for about 15 years. The thing with a lot of people that are building tiny houses, they're spending a huge amount of money on doing it. And despite spending a lot of money, they oftentimes also spend a lot of time. Like they spend maybe 50 to $150,000, and it's like a big project where they spend like 1 to 2 years building it. At that point, they are almost spending the same as a small sized normal house. Crazy. And the thing is, with a lot of people that are building or buying these tiny houses, they live there for like 1 to 3 years and then they stop doing it. That's the case with a lot of people that are doing it. 1 to 3 years, then they're so tired of it that they stop doing it. Even the classic example by I guess one of the first super famous tiny house people, Henry David Thoreau in Walden. He lived there 2 years, 2 months and 2 days, and then he moved away from his small cabin in the woods besides Walden Pond. So yeah, that's another really cool thing about this guy. He has lived there for about 15 years. And also his cabin looks really cozy and really nice. The reason I'm emphasizing the 14 days thing is that if you're building something really cheaply or inexpensively, if you spend a crazy amount of time doing it, yeah, now it's still not inexpensive because you've spent a lot of time, because time is extremely valuable. One of the most valuable non-renewable resources we have is time. You see people on YouTube that spends like 2 to 3 years building a small log cabin in the woods. That's crazy. During the settlers' time, during the early days of the United States of America, there was a concept, I think they called it the 10-day house. Basically, a bunch of guys got together and in about 10 days, they built a simple small log house or log cabin. Yet these days, despite modern technology, people are spending 2 to 3 years building a tiny, small log cabin in the woods. That's crazy. Of course, they can do it if they want, but don't come here and tell me that's a cheap cabin. That's crazy expensive. Even if you built it completely for free. If it is a tiny, small little cabin, and you spent 3 years building it, it's not really that cheap anymore. Henry David Thoreau in Walden, he talks about the same thing, that he thought that when it comes to housing, a place to live, it shouldn't cost it shouldn't cost you more than about 2 months of work. So if you're working for 2 months, 2 months worth of wages, that was what he was considering an okay price for a house. What do most people do these days? They get a huge mortgage, get into debt, and spend like 15 years worth of wages on a house. When I say that, usually people object. No, it's not like 15 years, and they get kind of angry about it. Yeah, sit down and do the math. If you make like $50,000 per year after taxes, for a lot of people, that's not even the case. But if that's the case, and you spend like 750, no, like $350,000 on a house, $350,000, that's like 7 years worth of wages. But the thing is, if you take up a mortgage, a loan, and you include the interest payments, the cost of the interest as well, then it's usually about the double of what you're borrowing. So then 7 years becomes 14, and you can probably slap on a bunch of maintenance and repairs as well on top of that. But yeah, about 14, 15 years worth of wages to pay for the box you're going to live in. That's crazy. During the Great Depression in America in the 1930s, one average house was costing about 2 average yearly salaries. But these days in America, it costs about 7 to 10 average salaries for an average house. But when it is that much money, like 7 to 10 yearly wages, most people have to do it with a mortgage. And if you include the interest payment on the mortgage, you can oftentimes double that sum. So yeah, isn't it strange that despite all the massive breakthroughs in modern technology, here we are about 100 years later, and the house has become about, what would you say, about 3 to 6 times as expensive as it was 100 years ago. That's crazy. Is it really worth it? Should you really have to be a slave to a mortgage for 3 decades just to pay for the box you live in? Especially when you can sit down and reflect that, hey, like 100 years ago, this house would only cost 2 average yearly salaries. And at that kind of price, it was actually realistically possible for a lot of people to work as an employee, as their one and only source of income, and save up 2 yearly salaries during a period of like 5 years. Then they could pay for a new house in cash without getting into debt at all. But yeah, when it comes to alternatives to getting in debt for 3 decades and spending 7 to 15 years worth of salaries to pay for the house or the home you live in, there are a bunch of alternatives out there. You can, for example, buy some rental real estate first, increase your income that way, and you can use some of the income from the rental real estate to pay for the place where you live. Things like that. That oftentimes requires some capital, though. But options like that is possible. But another option is to build a so-called tiny house, or yeah, a small cabin. But if you're going to do so, I think something like the way that Lamar Alexander, the Solar Cabin Off-Grid Adventure channel on YouTube, did it for like $2,000. Now that was 15 years ago, but super cheaply. Something like that can make sense for a lot of people. And the thing is, when it comes to tiny houses and that kind of thing, I'm not really that into it. Like I said, I'm both extremely positive and extremely negative to it. But the concept is really fascinating. And the thing is, a lot of people object to it, saying, no, it's not really practical because you can't have like a family, a wife, and 5 kids in that kind of small house. No, that's not practical at all. But do you have a wife and 5 kids? Maybe it could be a short-term solution. Maybe you could do it just for the heck of it, to test it out. If you got some really cheap land and you could do it extremely inexpensively, maybe the kind of way, something similar to what Lamar Alexander from the Solar Cabin Off-Grid Adventure channel did. If you can do it that way, maybe you can live there for like 4, 5, 10 years. Then you can move into a bigger house. Instead of renting for 5 to 10 years, maybe you could build something super cheaply, like this one, and live there. And then later on, you can move into your bigger house. And once you move, maybe you can just rent it out as an Airbnb, cabin, something like that. Yeah, let me try to share my screen and show you some images of his cabin. For those of you that are watching the video version, here we have his YouTube channel, Solar Cabin Off-Grid Adventure channel on YouTube. 122,000 subscribers, 552 videos. But yeah, look at this cabin. Yeah, here he has a video, how to build a 14 by 14 solar cabin. Over 4 million views. I was going to show you a picture of the cabin, but when it comes to the shit show that YouTube is turning into, it's not even possible to show a video anymore. Why are these videos popping up and blocking the screen? YouTube is a shit show. Yeah, for those of you watching the video version, here you can see a picture of his cabin. He has a website, simplesolarhomesteading.com, where where he is selling cabin plans and things like that. Offgridworld.com wrote a piece about him. They show a few pictures of the building process of how he built the cabin. And this cabin is just so cozy. It is not only one of the most inexpensive tiny houses I know of, it's also one of the best looking and most cozy ones. How incredible is that? He was also featured in Mother Earth News. But yeah, for those of you that is watching the video version, at least there's a few pictures. This Zoom shit show. How do I stop this screen share? So yeah, there you have it. The incredible story from Lamar Alexander, the Solar Cabin Off-Grid Adventure channel on YouTube. How he built his cabin slash tiny house for under $2,000 in 14 days. And now he has lived there for about 15 years. Imagine the kind of freedom you could have if you could live almost for free when it comes to housing. If you could live, imagine if you could live with no house payments, no utility bills, no rent payments. I read some statistics. Over 25% of Americans is spending over 50% of their monthly salaries on housing. That's incredible. So imagine the cost or the lifestyle cost of living. If you sit down and calculate and think about it, maybe that means for a lot of people, they are spending so much money on housing that the lifestyle, so to speak, that they're able to squeeze out of their money is actually worse than it would have been if they had lived in a super cheap cabin like the one I just showed you guys. Would you rather think about it? Would you, if you could choose, would you spend over 50% of your income on housing and live in a small cramped apartment in a big city? Or would you have no rent payments, no mortgage, no utility bills, and live off the grid in a peaceful place, in a small little cabin that you built with your own two hands in a few weeks for a few $1,000s? And then you would basically kind of double your money, kind of, because then you wouldn't be spending over 50% of your income on housing, because once you have paid that small cabin off, there was almost no expenses. Some firewood and some propane gas, and maybe a few solar panels, and then you would be good. Anyway, I just find that concept incredibly fascinating. There are options out there, you know. And of course, this is probably not an option for everyone. If you already have a family, you have a wife and 3, 4, 5 kids, yeah, then a small, tiny house is not practical. But there are a lot of options out there. And who knows, maybe this could be a short-term solution for a lot of people. But yeah, there are, of course, also options when it comes to building bigger houses cheaply as well. Another car is passing by. Yeah, anyway, there you have it. When it comes to things like budgeting and things like that, and saving money, lowering your expenses, a lot of people talk about the cafe latte crap. Yeah, don't buy a cafe latte. You're going to, instead of buying a cafe latte at Starbucks, you could invest it, and in 900 years from now, you would have $5 million. Almost something as ludicrous or as silly as that. You hear that a lot. Oh, the cafe latte factor. I agree. Small expenses definitely can rack up. We need to be careful about it. I completely agree. But at the same time, don't blow it out of proportions. Like not buying a cafe latte is going to change your life forever. Give me a break. those people writing books about the cafe latte factor and investing it in the stock market and getting a compound interest, you can retire in 40 years from now. Where are the success stories? It seems to me that almost only success stories amongst those are the people writing books about it, and they are making the money from selling the books, not from running the same plan themselves. So when it comes to things like saving, budgeting, things like that, I think it is important to at least mention the big ones: housing, college degrees, college loans, student loans, car loans, credit cards, and consumer debt. Those four I consider to be four of the big ones. So one of the big questions is, should we buy a house? Should we buy a home for like 2 months to 2 years worth of salaries, or 10 to 20 years worth of salaries? Should we do it without getting in debt? Or should we be a debt slave for 3 decades? That's one of the big ones. That's going to have a massive, that's going to have, that's going to make a massively bigger difference than a cafe latte per day. Yeah, just don't buy a cafe latte and everything will fix itself in your life. No, it won't. I'm not saying don't pay attention to those things. We should, but it is not the big one. Another big one, cars. It is completely normal to spend 20 to 25% of our income on car loans. A lot of people are doing it. Where basically for each monthly wages they earn, they spend about 20 to 25% of it to pay off the car payments on their car loans. And if you think about it, that basically means that if they are doing that long term, every fourth to fifth year they're working is spent just paying for the car. If they're working 4 years and spending 25% of their monthly payments on the car, okay, 1 out of each 4 years is spent only to pay for that car. And in other words, if they would have been working, if they had been working for like 4 to 5 years, and instead of paying for a car loan, they could have set those money aside into a bank account, and each 4 or 5 years they could take 1 year off work. Imagine what that would do to your lifestyle. Instead of driving around in a modern computer car that looks like crap anyway, who's going to fix up a computer car 30 years from now? Oh yeah, my granddaddy had this Tesla, I'm going to fix it up like an art piece. No, it is crap. It's going on garbage fillings. Almost all new cars, it is kind of like modern art. They look like crap. There's a lot of things with new cars that are better than it was on old cars, like safety, things like that, but they look like crap. So why should we spend 25% of our money to buy something that looks so horrible? If you're if you're going to spend that kind of money on a car, at least buy a cool one or a nice one. I saw this old lady on YouTube, 57 lady, she is called. She bought a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air I think she bought it in 1957. And she had it for something like 63 years. And she and she was actually using it as her kind of daily driver car. She used it to get to the store, to doctor appointments, to church meetings, things like that. Imagine that, buying one amazingly looking car, like an art piece, and having the same car for over 60 years. A lot of the things on her car had a lifetime warranty, and she had gotten them replaced multiple times. How does that math look like? And imagine the lifestyle of driving around in a 1957 Chevy Bel Air. That's also the thing, you know. Jim Rohn said that lifestyle is an amount. No, I mean, Jim Rohn used to say that lifestyle is not an amount, it's a practice, something like that. So are you going to spend 100K on a Tesla? Or are you going to spend or are you going to spend like 50K on a 57 Chevy Bel Air? What's the best lifestyle? I guess it depends on your use, but for a lot of people, it might be the 57 Chevy. Anyway, I'm rambling on here. Before I end this podcast episode, if you have not yet checked out communitycashcows.com, you definitely should. It's basically a course and community about building a paid community. I'm in the process of interviewing 30 real life success stories of people that are making at least $10,000 in profit per month by running an online paid community. At the time of this recording, I have not yet done all 30 interviews, but I made a bunch of them, and it's been fascinating. You know, talking about finances and money. Imagine if you didn't have to wait until you are 67 to retire. Maybe you could quit your job and work like 15 hours per week. Who knows? Some people are doing it. There are people working 4 to 16 hours per week on running an online paid community, and they're making over $10,000 in profit per month. One lady I interviewed, she was making 6 figures in profit per month. But yeah, just imagine the lifestyle and the options, opportunities, possibilities you would have if you're making like 10, 20, $30,000 in profit per month. Pretty pretty fascinating and liberating to think about. Because if you think about it, there are people in the world that are making multiple 5 figures in profit per month, and they're having a more unique lifestyle than some people that are multimillionaires. I'm not saying it's better to make 5 figures or multiple 5 figures in profit per month than being a multimillionaire. I'm just saying that when it comes to the lifestyle aspect, when it comes to designing your ideal lifestyle, there are some people making multiple 5 figures in profit per month that have a better lifestyle than some multimillionaires. And if you have time, income, and location independence, the amount of freedom that allows you to have is pretty mind-boggling to think about. If you're running an online paid community, you can be sitting in the rainforest or in an igloo or in a boat out on a fjord or on a beach in Mexico, or be on a road trip with your family, or in a log cabin off the grid, and still be running your online paid community. As long as you have access to the internet and you have a little laptop with you, you could probably be running it. Of course, if you're doing things correctly. But yeah, fascinating stuff. Now, me, myself, personally, I'm not dreaming of working only 15 hours per week, like for the rest of my life, but to be able to do it when I get my own paid community built out, to be able to do it for some periods at least, that's pretty liberating or inspiring, you know. But yeah, I'm not saying I'm an expert on this because I'm not, but I have interviewed several real life success stories, and what one man can do, another man can do. So yeah, it's possible. Anyway, check it out on communitycashcows.com. Take care and God bless.